Our saga begins in a valley of tears as the narrator reminds us that some souls in this world are born under a cursed star, demanding our pity. We witness a desperate flight for survival as a woman scrambles to escape the clutches of a nightmarish beast. A grotesque abomination with multiple arms tears through the crowd, and among those cursed by fate, the narrator whispers the name, Kang Sam. The scene shifts to the innocence of youth, a young boy watching the world crumble through a flickering news screen. Tragedy struck early. We learn that Kang Sam's parents were slaughtered by monsters while on their way to pick him up from school. But the nightmare didn't end there. His own blood relatives looted his inheritance like vultures, abandoning the boy to rot on the unforgiving streets as an orphan. Yet, the concrete jungle could not break him. It forged a steel will within his soul. He forced himself to consume rotten garbage just to see another sunrise. Clawing his way up from hell, he managed to find work, treating his studies like a holy mission, surviving on a mere 4 hours of sleep between labor and school. He possessed raw talent and unyielding grit. However, the heavens were heartless, never granting our tragic hero a single drop of fortune. A calamity of bad luck besieged him whenever opportunity knocked. On the day of a crucial exam, his appendix burst, forcing him to forfeit his future in agony. He tried to take another test, but fate intervened. The bus flipped over halfway there, leaving him injured and disqualified for lateness. Another day, simply trying to leave his home, a falling bicycle jammed his door, imprisoning him inside while his dream slipped away. No matter how fiercely he struggled, the universe conspired against him, trapping the protagonist in a loop of endless failure. He stood on the precipice of despair, ready to abandon the path of the hunter or even a normal job. Yet one glimmer of hope remained in the darkness. The awakening. The chosen ones are born with latent power that erupts when they turn 20 years old. This spiritual bloom was the golden ticket to becoming a hunter. Clinging to this lifeline, Kang honed his physique to the absolute limit, preparing his body for his destiny. But the gods were merely laughing at him. On his judgment day, the evaluation machine spat out a rank F, the lowest of the low. The examiner delivered the death sentence. He had zero ability. If the top 1% ruled the world, our hero was the bottom 1%, the trash beneath the trash. To add salt to the wound, the examiner couldn't help but chuckle at such a pathetic display. That pitying apology shattered whatever fragments of spirit the protagonist had left. Years of mediocrity drift by. We cut to the present, finding our hero now 25 years old and in the thick of combat. Battle erupts. A feral wolf beast lunges, and the protagonist barely holds the line with his shield. The impact is devastating. We hear the sickening crack of bone as his arm snaps under the immense pressure. Bloodlust burns in the beast's eyes. It lunges again, jaws wide, ready to tear out his throat. But he refuses to die here. With eyes full of grit, he seizes the wolf's limbs, twisting its momentum against it in a desperate gamble. Gravity takes hold, and he drives a brutal knee straight into the creature's snout. The beast crashes down, shattering the earth with the force of the impact. Desperate, the protagonist screams at his teammate, "Use your magic! For the love of God! I'm at my limit here!" The mage is uselessly charging a fireball. He calls our hero a mere meat shield, demanding he hold on while he gathers mana. Kang realizes the fatal error of his choices. He teamed up with this arrogant mage and another tank, a decision he now bitterly regrets. They are completely surrounded. The chaos is overwhelming, and the other tank has already lost an arm to the carnage. And the damage dealer? The mage who should be obliterating these fiends is failing miserably at his one job. These wolf-faced nightmares are known as gnolls. They are low-tier trash mobs, yet a rank F mage struggles to handle even 2 of them without support. The beast rises again. The protagonist realizes he nearly died just to buy a few seconds of time to wear it down. Finally, the mage stops stalling and finishes the charge, shouting for the protagonist to dodge the incoming blast. He aims a flaming bow, arrogance dripping from his voice. "I'll wipe them out in a single strike," he claims. A wave of relief washes over the hunters as the gnolls glare with undying hatred. The mage looses the arrow. It flies toward the beasts and completely misses. The spell fizzles into the dirt before it even touches the enemy. They stood frozen in place, their minds completely failing to grasp the absurdity of the situation. Panic seized the protagonist. He cursed the mage's incompetence, screaming that he had wasted precious mana on the dirt, and now they were absolutely screwed. But the argument was cut short by the clang of steel hitting stone. The other hunter had lost his weapon, and a voracious gnoll was already on top of him, jaws snapping for the kill. Disarmed and defenseless, his eyes filled with terror as he screamed for the protagonist to save him. But our hero had his own demons to fight. Clashing against another gnoll, he shouted for the warrior to hold on, promising help was on the way. Yet, amidst the carnage, a flicker of blue light caught his eye. The mage. He had opened a portal, not to fight, but to flee like a coward. With a face thick with shameless arrogance, the traitor justified his retreat. He claimed since death was inevitable for them, at least one should survive. He even sneered at the protagonist, calling him a mere meat shield. Pure rage ignited in our hero's blood. In this cruel world, the protagonist was a Tonka roll forced upon the powerless, those at the bottom of the food chain. That was why they bore the degrading title of human shields. Their deaths were expected, even trivial. To the high-ranking elites, they were nothing more than disposable tools to be discarded. Facing this bitter reality, he looked at the fallen hunter, moments away from being devoured by the beast. Temptation whispered in his ear, the portal was still open. Why throw away his life? Dying here to save someone worthless would be a meaningless end to his story. He turned toward the exit, but before he could take a single step toward salvation, his path was blocked, a voice echoed, proclaiming he had been chosen by Osmone, the god of trials and suffering. Confusion paralyzed him. He stood frozen before a wall as the mysterious entity revealed herself a breathtaking woman with hair as white as snow. Panic turned to fury. The portal was gone. He screamed at her, demanding to know where his only escape route had vanished to. But the silver-haired stranger didn't answer. Instead, she unleashed a scream so powerful it shook the very foundations of the dungeon. Her voice thundered with divine authority. From this moment on, you shall undergo a trial to atone for the karma of your past life. Kang couldn't comprehend a word of this madness. He could only clamp his hands over his ears, trying to survive the woman's explosive sonic blast. Past life? What was she talking about? Suddenly, she leapt from the high wall, landing with an impact that shattered the stone floor beneath her feet. He didn't even have a second to breathe. A shadow loomed behind him, and in an instant, razor-sharp claws pierced right through his chest. As life drained from him, the woman merely watched with a chilling, enigmatic gaze. A strange smile played on her lips as she whispered, "Please, make the right choice." The scene then shifts to the other hunter, still trapped in his nightmare. He was clinging to life by a thread, desperately struggling against the jaws of death. Tears streamed down his face as he wondered where it all went wrong. This tragic soul was named Kim Chunsik. Memories flooded back. He grew up in a broken home, terrorized by an alcoholic father who used his fists on his own wife. Unable to bear the abuse, his mother fled. Karma struck swiftly when his father died in a car crash, leaving young Kim with his grandmother his only sanctuary. Before the Great Cataclysm, before monsters roamed the earth, Kim was just an ordinary boy. He lived a humble life, dedicating his youth to supporting the grandmother who raised him. He worked as a regular salaryman, far removed from the violent world of hunters, until fate dealt him a cruel hand. His grandmother collapsed. The diagnosis was a rare, aggressive disease, and the medical bills were astronomical. Despair consumed him. There was no way to earn that kind of cash legally. He needed a fortune, fast, even if it meant gambling with his own life. That was the moment he walked into the abyss. He decided to become a hunter. But reality was harsh. He failed the hunter exam at age 20. His future looked bleak. Yet, he refused to give up. She was his everything, his only blood. He would burn the world down to protect her. Through sheer grit, he finally obtained his hunter license. But now, we return to the present, where his sacrifice is about to end in a bloody mess. As death approached, Regret tasted bitter. He should never have trusted that snake of a mage. Deep down, he had always known he would be betrayed. His strength was fading fast against the monster's crushing power. His final thoughts drifted to his grandmother. Who would care for her when he was gone? But suddenly, miracle! The beast froze. A blade whistled through the air, striking the monster dead in an instant. Kim lay there in total shock, his mind unable to process how he was still breathing. To understand this twist of fate, we must rewind the clock to the moment our protagonist was impaled. The white-haired woman pointed a finger at him, unveiling the truth. In your past life, you were a demon. That was the source of his cursed existence. Our hero was baffled. He didn't care about demons or past lives, he just couldn't understand how he was still standing after taking a lethal blow to the heart. Yet, the mysterious woman merely brushes the wolf's claw, and it disintegrates into nothingness like burnt ash. She touches his stomach, and the gruesome wound vanishes. Flesh knitting, completely bewildered, Kang stammers, demanding answers about this sorcery and asking if she actually planned to kill him just now. She reiterates the grim truth. In a past life, he was a creature of darkness. A fleeting vision flashes before USA silhouette of the protagonist draped in the shadows of a former era. Kang cannot grasp the gravity of her words. But the woman states coldly that his belief is irrelevant. The choice to accept reality lies solely with him. However, she issues a bone-chilling warning. Unless he resolves the heavy karma of his past, he is destined for a life of eternal misery. But there is a path to redemption. By conquering these trials, he can cleanse his soul of past sins, not to mention the legendary rewards that await the strong. He must accept this destiny quest immediately, for it is the only lifeline he has left to escape a cursed existence. She then rushes toward the protagonist, who is paralyzed by indecision, declaring that the time for talk is over. The first trial begins now. The mission objective is clear. Escort the Hunter Chin Chunsik safely out of this hellish dimension they are trapped in. The protagonist snaps back, telling her to stop sprouting nonsense. They were barely surviving the monsters before, let alone protecting someone else. Despair clouds his judgment. What is a weakling supposed to do against such overwhelming odds? She cuts off his whining by revealing a glowing blue blade, radiating spiritual energy, and tells him this artifact is his advance payment. Flashback to the moment death knocked at Chin's door, we see the protagonist charging into the fray, steel in hand. The two gnolls spot him, one already gripping a makeshift club, ready to crush him. As they rush him with killing intent, the protagonist uncorks a hidden power, and a brilliant magical seal erupts from within. The mundane sword he wielded is suddenly engulfed in an arcane aura, transforming into a blade with an edge sharp enough to slice through the wind itself. Empowered by this new strength, he clashes with the beasts, raising his shield to deflect their savage onslaught. He dances across the battlefield with agility he never knew he possessed, his body moving on instinct to evade every lethal strike. Finding an opening, he slides beneath the monster's guard and drives his blade upward in a vicious arc. It is a critical hit. The steel pierces through the gnoll's defenses, drawing a howl of agony from the beast's throat. Seizing this split second of vulnerability, the protagonist roars and delivers the execution strike. Fury blazes in his eyes. He drives the sword deeper with every ounce of his spirit, even as the desperate enemy tries to push him back with its claws. But the monster is too slow. Before it can crush the protagonist, its strength fails, and it collapses to the dirt, defeated once and for all. However, victory came at a price. The beast's claw managed to graze Kang's arm. Still, he lets out a breath of relief that at least one enemy is down. But in that fleeting moment of relaxation, the second gnoll nearly tears a chunk out of him. He barely manages to twist his body away at the final second. Kang curses loudly as a terrifying realization hits him. His sword is still lodged deep within the corpse of the first enemy. If he wants to survive, he needs a weapon. And fast. The woman's voice echoes in his mind, a cold reminder that these trials are designed to push a human to the very brink of death. He must etch that warning into his soul if he hopes to see tomorrow. Grit shows on his face as he draws a small dagger. He leaps toward the beast, roaring a challenge for it to come at him with everything it has. He parries the deadly claw swipe, but the pain in his injured arm nearly makes him drop his weapon. He holds on through sheer willpower. With a surge of adrenaline, he strikes a vital point, burying the dagger to the hilt. The monster falls limp, and the protagonist gasps for air, hardly believing he survived. But the nightmare isn't over. He remembers Chin is still in mortal danger and sprints back to wrench his primary sword from the first gnoll's carcass. With the weapon back in hand, he channels all his remaining strength and hurls it like a javelin. The blade flies true, landing a perfect headshot on the enemy holding Chin, ending its life in a single, brutal instant. The protagonist watches with a look of pure salvation before his legs give out, and he collapses, utterly drained by the intense combat. But before darkness takes him, a notification pings in his mind. The trial is complete. The rewards are now being distributed. He drifts into unconsciousness, only to be rudely awakened by a sharp slap across the face and a command to wake up immediately. The scene shifts, and we see the mysterious woman looking down at him with zero patience, hand raised to strike him again if he dares to sleep. Kang is still groggy, but she shoves a piece of parchment into his hands, declaring that this is the payment for his blood and sweat. The protagonist is baffled. He risked his life for a single piece of paper? But before he can complain, the girl snaps at him to be grateful she even printed it out. Suddenly, the paper dissolves into light. It transforms into a high-tech holographic system interface. Even the woman looks surprised, muttering that times have truly changed in the mortal realm. She finalizes the interaction, warning him that the mission isn't truly over yet. She scolds him for fainting so easily and tells him to toughen up for next time. Then, without a backward glance, she vanishes into thin air. The protagonist stares at the glowing screen in front of him, his eyes widening as he realizes he has unlocked a massive arsenal of new skills all at once. Among the spoils was a legendary 3-star healing art. It wasn't just a simple cure, it allowed him to burn his own life force to supercharge his recovery rate. The second was an evolution skill, a passive ability that hardened his defense like steel. The system promised that once his holy power hit 50, he would transcend his current limits. You have to understand, most hunters spend their entire lives clinging to pathetic 1-star abilities. Only those ranked D or higher can even dream of wielding 2-star techniques. As for 3-star skills, those are reserved for the chosen few blessed by the heavens. A rush of euphoria crashed over him. All his blood, sweat, and tears had finally paid off with a power that could shake the very foundations of this world. But his celebration was cut short. The system's notification echoed in his mind. The quest wasn't complete yet. To clear the scenario, he still had one final objective. He had to escort Chin out of this hellhole alive. Panic seized him as he rushed to his fallen comrade. He cursed himself for getting distracted by the rewards, terrified that the silence from the floor meant he was already too late. Kang checked his pulse. It was faint, fading fast. There was no way Chin would survive the trip to a hospital. Death was knocking at the door. That's when it clicked. The protagonist looked at his new skills and realized this wasn't a coincidence. The system had given him exactly what he needed to cheat death. "Hang in there," he whispered, his voice steady with resolve. He placed his hands over Chin, channeling his mana to defy the Reaper. Chin's body was a mess of torn flesh from the Gnoll's brutal assault. But as the warm glow of the protagonist's magic enveloped him, the wounds began to knit together in a miraculous display of restoration. With the crisis averted, the scene shifts to the world outside the dungeon. At the Hunter Management Bureau, the traitorous mage, Munsamin, strutted down the hallway. He grumbled under his breath, annoyed at being summoned like a common servant. He burst into the office with his nose in the air, demanding they make it quick. "I'm a busy man," he sneered, "so spit it out." But the room wasn't empty. Several high-ranking investigators stood like statues, their gazes cold. "We need to discuss the incident during your last raid," one of them stated grimly. And sitting quietly in the corner was a ghost he never expected to see again, the protagonist. Munsamun's face went pale. His eyes nearly popped out of his skull. Seeing the rookie alive shattered his reality. That boy was supposed to be Monster Chow. "Sit down," the officer commanded. Panic flared in the mage's eyes, and he spun around to bolt, but the agents were faster, forcing him into the chair. The coward scrambled toward the exit, desperate to flee, but a female hunter intercepted him with a bone-rattling takedown. "Abandoning a teammate?" she hissed. "You're not going anywhere." She pinned him down, reciting the hunter's code. Leaving a comrade to die in a dungeon isn't just immoral, it is a capital offense punishable by the highest laws. Munsaman struggled, sweat pouring down his face. "You can't prove anything," he shrieked. "Do you have evidence I did it on purpose?" The investigator simply smirked and turned a tablet toward him. "We have it all in 4K resolution," she replied coldly. The footage was damning. It showed the exact moment his spell fizzled out. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back. He just ran like a rat, leaving his team to die. As the reality of his situation sank in, the mage began to tremble with terror. Meanwhile, in the observation room, the protagonist watched the pathetic display in silence. The female investigator turned to the protagonist, her expression softening. "Thank you. Without your recording, he would have walked free. I can't imagine the hell you went through to get this." She sighed, explaining a dark truth of their world. Hunters murdering other hunters in the gates happens more than we'd like to admit. But catching them? That's nearly impossible since dead men tell no tales. The protagonist shrugged, a dark glint in his eye. "I learned the hard way to trust no one. That's why I always keep my body cam rolling. In the lawless chaos of a dungeon, taking a life is as easy as breathing. That is why veterans are paranoid about who they watch their backs." Monsaman was a prime example of trash. He lost his nerve the moment things went south. Worse yet, when his magic failed, he didn't feel remorse. He felt inconvenienced. To him, the porters and low rankers weren't people. They were just meat shields he had purchased to buy himself time. The investigators were puzzled. "We saw the fight," one noted. "You move with the skill of a veteran, far beyond a rank F tank. Why are you wasting your talent as a meat shield? If you join the military defense force, they'd equip you with heavy firepower to handle these beasts," they suggested. But the protagonist shook his head. "Bullets bounce off high-level monsters like pebbles. Besides," he touched his chest, thinking of his cursed luck. "I prefer to rely on my own strength rather than borrowed." With the interrogation finished, the chapter on the traitor was finally closed. He stepped out into the fresh air, a weight lifted from his shoulders. He hoped Munsaman would rot in a cell until the end of his days. But as he walked, a familiar face intercepted him. It was Kim, the man he had pulled from the jaws of death. The man didn't just say hello, he dropped to his knees right there on the pavement. Tears streamed down his face as he bowed. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a second chance at life." The narrative rewinds 3 days. We see Kim waking up in a sterile hospital room, the smell of antiseptic filling his nose. His memories were hazy, but one image burned bright. Kang standing alone against the horde of gnolls, a lone wall of defense protecting him. "I should be dead," Kim muttered. He couldn't fathom how a rank F rookie slaughtered those beasts. But his train of thought was derailed by a shrill, worried voice. "You stupid boy!" His grandmother stood by the bed, trembling with a mix of relief and fury. "Why would you take such a reckless job for my sake?" she cried, hitting his arm. "Have you lost your mind? Were you trying to leave your old grandmother all alone in this world?" Kemen begged him to calm his racing heart, worried about his blood pressure, but the old woman's eyes filled with despair as she told him he looked no better than a walking corpse. The young man tried to comfort her, claiming victory simply by returning with his life. But his grandmother countered with a mother's fierce love, saying she would gladly trade her fading life for his safety, begging him. Memories of golden days began to flood his mind, recalling the precious moments shared with the woman who raised him, fueling his desperate desire for a peaceful existence by her side. Emotion overwhelmed them as his grandmother pulled him into a tearful embrace, sobbing as she implored him not to throw his life away in the dungeons. The scene shifts back to reality, where Kim is making a massive spectacle on the street, bowing deeply before our protagonist in a display of overwhelming gratitude. Kim pours out his thanks, but the main character responds with cold logic, stating that in the dungeons, your team is your lifeline, so saving him was merely a survival calculation. Kan admits that fear had paralyzed him, confessing that He is no valiant hero like Chin believes him to be. Yet the man continues to gaze at him with hero worship, making our protagonist squirm with discomfort as he tells him to drop the act. The main character realizes he cannot simply reveal the cold truth to Kemen, that he only saved him to complete a system mission and never expected their paths to cross again in this lifetime. He attempts to fade into the background and escape, but Chin calls out, desperate to know how he can possibly repay a life debt. But before the topic of a reward can even be settled, the world freezes as the mechanical voice of the system echoes in his skull once more. The system announces the arrival of a new trial, revealing the critical illness of Kemen's mother and demanding a donation of 150,000 won to cover her life-saving surgery. Hearing these demands, the protagonist questions why the burden of this stranger's fate falls upon his shoulders, until the system sweetens the deal. The reward is a stat increase and a shiny new 1-star skill. He frantically checks his bank account and realizes he has the funds, but it represents every cent he has scraped together through blood and sweat over years of grinding. Despair crashes over him as he looks at his life savings, but remembering the prophecy that this act would cleanse his karma, he steels his resolve to make the donation. The voice explains that since he accepted this path of trials, there is no turning back now. To refuse is to forfeit all rewards and invite a karma so catastrophic it could leave him in a living death, a vegetative state for the rest of his days. The mere thought of such a hellish fate forces the protagonist to realize he is cornered. He has no choice but to dance to the system's tune. The protagonist rationalizes that even if the immediate reward seems insignificant, failing here means the door to future power and trials will be slammed shut forever. He reminds himself of the astronomical wealth high-ranking hunters possess if he climbs the ranks. Earning back 150,000 won will be child's play. Stuck at the bottom of the food chain as an F-rank hunter, he lacks access to the marketplace, so acquiring a skill directly is a priceless advantage. After a moment of intense deliberation, he decides to call the Hunters Association, transferring the funds and unlocking a mysterious new skill that remains hidden from our eyes for now. The scene abruptly transitions to the Hunter exam arena, where the proctor summons the hopeful candidates to step forward into their destiny. He explains that the trial will take place within a hyper-realistic virtual reality where they must pilot pre-made avatars to prove their true combat sense. These avatars come with locked classes and roles, and the objective is to execute their duties flawlessly. Complaining about the hand fate deals you will only lead to failure. The examiner declares that true mastery transcends stats. A skilled hunter will clear the mission regardless of limits, while failure lies solely on the pilot, not the vessel. When the protagonist's name is called, fate seems to have a sense of humor, assigning him the role of the group's tank. His mission is to survive a brutal onslaught from a pack of gnolls for 5 minutes, a nightmare scenario he has already lived through once before. The system equips him with a basic sword and shield, locking all his physical stats at a flat 30 to ensure a level playing field. With a final wish for luck, they are digitized and thrust into the virtual battlefield. Inside the simulation, he is immediately confronted by 4 gnolls, their eyes burning with murderous intent as they prepare to charge. As the examiners analyze the feed from the outside, the protagonist reflects on the grueling agony he endured just to raise his real-world stats by a single point. Now, within this digital world, he finally wields a stat of 30, matching the power level of the test perfectly. And as he marvels at this balance, one of the high-ranking examiners seems to take a keen interest in his performance. The protagonist realizes he has acquired the Guardian Shield skill, the ultimate tool for a tank, and decides this is the perfect stage to unleash its power. The gnolls roar and charge, but the protagonist stands like an iron fortress, barely avoiding the snapping jaws of the first beast. He blocks the lethal bite with his shield, but a second monster materializes from his blind spot, claws swiping for the kill. Relying on pure instinct, he leaps away at the final second, the beast's claws slicing the air inches from his face as it crashes uselessly into the ground. He closes the distance in a heartbeat and delivers a thunderous kick to the creature's ribs, sending the monster flying like a ragdoll until it crashes violently into its kin. Death descends from above as another beast launches an aerial ambush. But our hero is a fortress of steel. With sword and shield in perfect harmony, he deflects the blow with casual ease. The realization hits him like a rush of adrenaline. Having every stat at 30 isn't just balanced, it is overpowering. This avatar moves with a fluidity his real body could never dream of. Fusing those enhanced stats with his veteran battle instincts, he dominates the monsters with the grace of a master swordsman, once again capturing the examiner's gaze. High above, an operator whispers in disbelief. The protagonist's ability to read the flow of battle and react instantly is God tier. Among all the hopefuls today, he stands alone at the summit of capability. Though merely a tank, he fights like a warrior god. His shield deflects every strike, and with a roar of effort, he hurls a beast away, inciting a blazing fury within the creature's eyes. However, the monster's primitive AI shifts gears. It spots 3 helpless NPCs wandering nearby. Ignoring the steel wall in front of it, the beast turns its bloodlust toward the easy prey. The examiner leans forward. The true test of a tank is not just survival, but protection. Would the candidate even notice the impending slaughter? The beast charges, a streak of death aiming straight for the civilians. But that is when the magic happens. He unleashes his signature skill, Guardian Shield. An invisible force erupts, dragging the hatred of every monster onto him alone. Miraculously, he withstands the onslaught. 3 simultaneous strikes clatter against his defenses, and he even blocks a blindside attack with supernatural precision. The observation room is left stunned. In his mind, the hero analyzes the mechanics. This skill forces a duel, bending the enemy's will to attack only him. He muses that cleansing his bad karma is forcing him down the path of the martyr. The system is molding him into the ultimate altruist, sacrificing his body for the greater good. The tank is the shield of the party, the first line of defense. When the formation breaks, they are the first to bleed. It is a role begging for bodies, yet finding few volunteers. There was a golden age when mercenaries flocked to the role for the heavy coin. But gold cannot be spent by the dead. Over time, the terror of the frontline drove men away from the profession. High risk, high reward. A gamble with death itself. And for our protagonist, it was the only game worth playing. It beat the slow death of bureaucracy and endless paperwork. The thrill of the shield, the heat of battle, this was where he truly belonged. Lost in the rhythm of combat, he didn't even realize the simulation had ended until the monsters dissolved into data. His eyes are set on the horizon. No more F-rank mediocrity. He is done being barred from the elite raids. He is done with the sneers directed at the weak. It is time to rewrite his reputation. He glances up at the massive scoreboard, and the room goes silent. Jaws drop as the verdict is revealed. Rank, S+. A perfect score. Absolute domination. The scene shifts to the cold halls of the Hunters Association. An examiner is tearing into a group of failures, his voice dripping with disdain. He spits that they cannot even handle the basics. What possessed them to apply? Delusions of grandeur? He demands to know if they understand their own fragility. The dungeon is not a sandbox, it is a graveyard. As he scolds them, a shadow of past trauma flickers in his eyes. But the haunting memory is interrupted by a single file on his desk. His eyes widen. The protagonist's record is an anomaly. Ideal behavior, perfect aggro control, and 0 damage taken. Not only that, he protected the allies with the grace of a veteran general. It was the highest level of performance ever recorded in a basic test. Suddenly, a staff member interrupts his awe. We learn this terrifying examiner also holds the rank of team leader. Back in the simulation room, a female hunter outlines the next hell. Phase 2, team combat, groups of 5. They will be warped into a chaotic E-rank zone. The objective is simple: extinction. Eliminate every monster in the zone. Only those who prove their worth will survive the cut. It is a blind entry. Random zones, random teammates. You won't know who you are fighting beside until the teleportation light fades. Even the leaders are chosen by the luck of the draw. She announces the captains. Team 1 will be led by the golden boy, Min Ha Jae. Team 2 falls to a man named Huang Bo. The guy is already sweating buckets. Nobody knows how fate placed him in charge. To settle the drafting order, they resort to the ancient ritual of rock, paper, scissors. Min Ha Jae claims victory. With the first pick, he scans the crowd for his strongest asset. He prioritized defense over offense. Johan noted that an impenetrable front line was the key to any successful raid, provided the damage dealers could actually pull their weight. Min wasted no time, snatching up a mountain of muscle to serve as his team's unbreakable fortress. When it was finally Yo's turn, sweat beaded on his forehead. Panic set in as he realized the pool of talent had dried up. Only 2 candidates remained. He stared at Kanan in disbelief. With a frame that slight, could he truly walk the path of the tank? It defied all logic. But a glass shield was better than no shield at all. He locked in the choice, and the grueling selection process finally ground to a halt. The teams were set. The examiner's voice cut through the tension. Out there, in the chaos of real battle, there would be no safety nets. They had 30 minutes. 30 minutes to forge bonds with strangers and prepare for hell before the exam truly began. Min's squad was already celebrating their ironclad frontline. Their leader exuded confidence, promising victory if everyone simply held their ground and followed the formation. Meanwhile, over in the main character's camp, the atmosphere was suffocating. Things weren't just bad, they were catastrophic. Seeing their so-called leader paralyzed by anxiety, the protagonist stepped up, breaking the heavy silence to ask about their battle plan. Jolted by the question, Yo started shouting awkwardly, trying to manufacture morale by asking if anyone had a brilliant strategy ready to go. As the chaotic planning continued, the examiner's gaze remained fixed on one person, the protagonist. He reviewed the boy's file a history of failed tests. He possessed raw potential, sure, but he lacked the refined talent expected of a hunter. The 30 minutes evaporated in an instant. The examiners announced the start, and reality shifted. The scene transitioned to the virtual battleground. Min's team materialized in a grassy field, clad in the digital armor of their chosen classes. Suddenly, the tank roared a warning to dodge. An enemy materialized from the void, slamming a heavy blow against his shield. Min screamed for formation. A squad of armed orcs stood before them, hungry for blood. The tank activated Iron Body. His defense skyrocketed, turning him into an unmovable object against the orcs' relentless assault. Min proved his worth as a commander, ordering the healer to buff and sustain the front line's health while shouting for the damage dealers to unleash hell on the enemy. The archer let a shaft fly, but the orcs swatted it away like a fly. However, it was a trap. The distraction allowed the swordsman to slide in low for a lethal strike. The orc reacted instantly. Weapons clashed, sending sparks flying through the air. Sensing an opening, another orc swung a massive axe, aiming to crush the swordsman in a blindside attack. But the tank was one step ahead. He triggered Guardian Shield, a very skill the protagonist had used earlier, forcing the axe-wielding beast to focus solely on him. Steel met iron in a thunderous collision of axe and shield. The situation escalated as 2 more orcs joined the fray. 3 massive monsters charged the tank at once, pushing his endurance to the limit. Min analyzed the battlefield. To an outsider, it looked desperate, but with the constant stream of heals and buffs, he knew they could hold the line. Seizing the moment, he and the archer moved to flank the distracted monsters. Victory seemed within reach, until a guttural growl echoed from the distance. Min froze, terror gripping his heart. He looked up to see a nightmare manifesting a heavily armed horde was descending upon them. He counted 8 more beasts. The first 3 weren't the main force, they were just the scouting party. He struck one down and scrambled back, screaming for everyone to retreat behind the tank's protective shadow. Yunsu, the tank, was barely holding on. Under the weight of 3 orcs, his shield arm was trembling, his defense on the verge of shattering. Min roared at him. If that front line collapsed, they would be slaughtered in seconds. Far away, the examiners watched the chaos unfold through drone feeds. One of them grabbed a mic, his voice calm amidst the storm. He began to lecture, pointing out a critical truth that most rookies failed to grasp. The government's ranking system wasn't a badge of honor, it was a guarantee of competence. Society trusted an E-rank hunter to handle E-rank threats because that was the standard. An F-rank tank was expected to struggle against orcs. That was the natural order. If he could solo those monsters right now, he wouldn't be testing for E-rank, he'd be destined for something far greater. The lesson was clear. Individual skill meant nothing here. Either the entire team functioned as a single unit, or they would all fail together. Min, on the brink of exhaustion, realized the examiner was right. If the tank fell, their hopes fell with him. He screamed for the healers to pour everything they had into keeping Yunsu alive. While they bought time, he and the strikers would flank the enemy from the rear. Min charged forward with reckless abandon. His sword bit into orc flesh, but he barely managed to dodge the beast's lethal counterattack. Meanwhile, the tank is taking a devastating beating, his shield fracturing under the relentless assault. The battle rages on. The archer rains down a desperate volley to draw the orcs' aggro, while the healers push their mana to the limit. After a grueling struggle, they finally clear the stage and escape the virtual nightmare. The tank exits the simulation first and immediately collapses. He hits the floor, completely out cold and battered. The other participants gasp in horror as a medical team rushes in to administer emergency aid. The rest of the squad is totally drained, gasping for air, but they receive hollow congratulations for barely surviving the trial. As the fallen tank is carted off on a stretcher, the loudspeaker booms. Next up, the protagonist's team. Joe freezes in terror at the sight, his confidence shattering as he questions if they can truly survive this. Swallowing their fear, he and his group step through the portal, directly into a festering, murky swamp. Joe grits his teeth, thinking their tank is even flimsier than the last team's. He realizes he'll have to take the vanguard position himself. It is not just him, the heavy atmosphere weighs on the entire squad as they trudge through the sucking mud. However, the protagonist remains calm, his senses sharpened to a razor's edge. Suddenly, a heavy footfall vibrates through the earth. Joe screams a warning, "Incoming! Get in formation!" He draws his arrows, adrenaline spiking. Too late. An armed goblin descends like a demon, splashing into the muck as if fate decided to mock them. Panic sets in as the party members feel the treacherous mud dragging their feet down like quicksand. High above, the examiner analyzes the trap. Usually, hunters scout the terrain, but this is a blind test. They have zero chance to prepare. They must adapt or die, while the goblins move through the filth with terrifying ease. Realizing the situation has gone critical, the party attempts a frantic retreat. A goblin lunges through the air, blade thirsting for blood. But time's clang. Asterisk Khan steps in, his shield intercepting the lethal blow. With a swift motion, he drives his sword into the beast, forcing the wretch back with a deep wound. Khan's voice cuts through the panic. "Steady your hearts!" He commands them to focus so they can counterattack. An enemy archer draws a bead on the protagonist, but he casually swats the arrow aside with his blade like it was nothing. His eyes narrow. These aren't random strikes. The goblins are coordinated. The Rhea Hobgoblin puppet master pulling the strings from the shadows. But none of that mattered. For this specific hell, he possessed the ultimate counter skill. Asterisk, skill activate. Guardian's Will. Asterisk. His defense and health regeneration skyrocket in proportion to the number of enemies surrounding him. A surge of power courses through his veins. With barely a twitch, he sends the goblin horde flying with overwhelming force. Up in the control booth and down on the field, everyone watches in stunned disbelief at this display of dominance. Joe seizes the momentum. "Attack now!" he roars, and the team wastes no time. Inspired by the protagonist's immovable strength, they begin slaughtering the goblins one by one. However, the protagonist notices a flaw in his godlike power. As the enemy numbers dwindle, the buff begins to fade. His ironclad defense and regeneration drop with every monster that falls. An interesting trade-off, he muses. But the trial isn't over. Asterisk. Boom! Asterisk. A massive tremor shakes the ground. Fall back, he shouts instantly. He raises his shield just as a titan slams into him. He looks up a high-level orc. Here? In an E-rank zone? That is a D-rank monster. The group goes pale, convinced a catastrophic glitch has occurred in the system. They brace themselves to flee. But as the protagonist stares down the beast, he spots something chilling. Perched casually on the orc's massive shoulder is Asmount. Why is he here? As the protagonist questions this anomaly, it becomes clear that even the examiners are blind to this threat. They frantically radio the supervising hunter. "We scanned the area 3 times. There was no signal of a monster like that." The hunter and his crew panic. "Abort the test. We cannot let more students be massacred." But the intrigued examiner intervenes. "Wait. Hold the abort command." The official with glasses looks at him like he's insane. "The media is watching us like hawks after the last casualties. We can't risk it." The supervising hunter, revealed to be the legendary Kim Hunming, remains ice cold. "I understand the risk," Kim states, his voice carrying absolute authority. "But I don't make reckless gambles." He leans forward, eyes glued to the screen. "If the boy is in mortal danger, I will step in personally." "Do not interfere yet," he commands. "Give them time. Let us witness what they are truly made of." The other proctors couldn't believe their ears, assuming this was some twisted joke, considering Director Myung-min had been expelled from the field before for this exact kind of reckless behavior. Even with the lives of the participants hanging by a thread, the examiner with glasses relented, but warned that if blood was spilled, the director alone would bear the weight of that sin. Meanwhile, back in the heat of the trial, our hero turned his gaze to the spectral figure, Asmount. It seemed the protagonist had truly awakened. Asmount declared that the 3rd trial had begun and his mission was brutal: ensure the survival of every single squad member. If the orc claimed even one soul, the crushing weight of that life would fall upon his shoulders alone. A chilling realization struck him. Her voice was resonating directly inside his skull. No one else in the arena could see or hear the mysterious girl. She delivered the final ultimatum. If a teammate died, the catastrophic karma would rebound and destroy the protagonist's future. But he had walked through hell before. Familiar with this pressure, he steeled his nerves, ready to handle whatever fate threw his way. Before he could utter a single question, Asmount bid him farewell, vanishing into thin air just as the massive orc brought its axe down in a skull-splitting arc. Death missed him by a hair's breadth. He twisted away at the final millisecond, the heavy blade burying itself deep into the churning mud where his head had been. This battle would be a nightmare. He grit his teeth, complaining that he had only just awakened as an E-rank hunter, yet the system was already feeding him to a monster far beyond his level. He cursed Asmount under his breath, feeling like the entire universe wanted him dead to punish him for the accumulated karma of a past life. Yet, surrender was not in his vocabulary. He roared at his trembling squad, commanding them to ready their weapons because he was about to hold the line against the beast's onslaught. He raised his shield, bracing for impact, just as the orc hoisted its massive weapon. The monster prepared a strike fueled by pure malice. The ground shook, sending mud flying, as the protagonist planted his feet to weather the storm. But instead of blocking, he moved. Dodging the fatal blow, he gripped his blade and charged right into the giant's guard. The creature roared in fury, swinging blindly at the pest beneath it, but the boy was too fast, executing a perfect backstep to evade the counterattack. The wind pressure alone from the axe tore at his skin. That gust of wind confirmed his worst fears. A single direct hit from this monstrosity would mean instant game over. Yowu, fighting through her terror, notched an arrow. She screamed at the frozen team, reminding them that their tank was risking his life to protect them, so they had to fight back. But their spirits were already broken. The others stood rooted to the spot, their minds shattered by overwhelming fear. One hunter stared blankly, wondering if they had all gone insane to even attempt surviving the situation. Panic turned to toxicity. The man spat venom at the protagonist, claiming that if the tank hadn't engaged, the examiners would have ended the test by now. Instead of raising his weapon, he stood uselessly, praying for the administration to intervene and save his cowardly hide. While director Myung-min watched with cold calculation, Yo-woo took action. She leaped into the fray, her arrows finding their marks and dropping 2 goblins in a flash of skill. Inspired by her bravery, the other hunters swallowed their fear and finally joined the chaotic dance of battle. One caster summoned his magic, levitating a massive tree trunk and hurling it violently toward the orc. The monster flinched under the barrage, turning to charge the backline, but the protagonist intercepted. His sword flashed, carving a deep gash into the beast's ankle. Yet, despite their desperate assault, the orc refused to fall. Instead, its eyes began to glow crimson as it entered a state of unbridled berserk rage. The protagonist watched in horror. A monster of this caliber shouldn't have a frenzy mode. Before he could react, the beast vanished, reappearing with godlike speed to deliver. In a split second, Kang was swallowed by the violence. Myung-min watched impassively, while Yo-woo could only scream his name in despair. Dust settled to reveal the devastating aftermath. Our hero had been launched like a rag doll by the sheer force of the impact. He struggled to rise, coughing up blood, but the nightmare wasn't over. The orc materialized directly in front of him, looming like the Reaper himself. A massive fist crashed down, barely stopped by his shield. But the beast was cunning. It used its free hand to smash the axe handle into him, driving him into the dirt with bone crush. The glasses-wearing examiner panicked, shouting that this had gone too far and they needed to abort the mission immediately before a student was slaughtered. Yet, Director Myung-min remained a statue, his eyes glued to the monitors, refusing to issue the stop command. Against all odds, the protagonist rolled away from death. He slid through the mud, his blade biting once more into the monster's leg as he escaped. His body was screaming. His passive skill, Healing Aura, flared to life, slowly regenerating his health points, but his stamina was hitting rock bottom. The green light of recovery was faint. It wasn't nearly enough to wash away the crushing weight of his fatigue. As his teammates cried out in concern, a dark thought crossed his mind. Should he just give up? But then, clarity struck him like a lightning bolt. He realized the key to victory lay in aggro control. He didn't need to kill it, he just had to prevent the orc from crossing the defensive line. A fire ignited in his eyes. He summoned every ounce of his remaining willpower, swearing to become an immovable wall so his team could survive this hell. He roared at his allies, his voice cracking with intensity, telling them to ignore his injuries and keep fighting because he could take it. While the examiners trembled in the control room and goblin corpses littered the ground, the raid party poured everything they had into the unkillable beast. With a final war cry, Kang charged forward once more. He screams at the squad to hold the line of victory is within reach. But the orc, fueled by exhaustion and berserker rage, slams a devastating blow into our hero, launching him across the battle. By now, the raid party has finally adapted to the monster's rhythm. They seize the opening, unleashing a bombardment of skills upon the beast. Under the barrage, the behemoth finally crashes to its knees. Yeo lets out a breath of relief, convinced the battle is over. But suddenly, the monster unleashes one final, earth-shaking roar and hurls its massive axe at the protagonist with every ounce of its remaining life force. Yo screams a warning. Kang braces himself, calculating if he can tank the hit. But midway through, a chilling realization strikes him. The weapon isn't aiming for him at all. The axe is flying through the air with lethal precision, straight toward that complaining hunter from earlier. In the chaos of the raid, everyone had completely forgotten the guy was even there. Panic explodes in the protagonist's chest instantly. He remembers the system's cruel rule. If a single person dies, he suffers a massive penalty to his karma. Desperate, he sprints toward his teammate to intercept the blow, but the scene cuts to black, leaving us hanging on a brutal cliffhanger. We cut back to the safety of the facility. The bespectacled examiner is bowing deeply, apologizing for the glitch and promising compensation for the life-threatening risk. Yo and the others vent their frustration, knowing it was a system error. But our hero is drowning in guilt, convinced this entire disaster was triggered by his bad karma. Surprisingly, Myung-min steps forward, bowing his head. He declares he will take full responsibility for the incident. But as the camera shifts perspective, We see the complainer standing alive and well right behind him, leaving a lingering mystery in the air. What exactly happened in those final seconds? And how on earth did that guy survive? Later, the examiner pulls the protagonist aside for a private chat. He's escorted to a VIP room, treated to fine tea and waffles. Myung-min cuts through the small talk. He asks if it's true that Kang has worked as a human shield for the last 6 years. The protagonist confirms it, hiding nothing. The examiner admits he was awestruck by Kang's adaptability. For a moment, he actually believed our hero was strong enough to solo a ranked orc warlord. Finally, the pieces click into place for the protagonist. That explains the long delay and why the goddess Asmodeus didn't intervene with her usual tricks. Myung-min gets straight to business. He wants the protagonist to join the Rangers, the elite guild he secretly belongs to. He explains that his examiner role is temporary. He'll return to active duty in a few months, and he has the authority to sign Kang up right now. He offers a choice: join as a full-time employee with benefits or sign on as a mercenary for hire. He reiterates how impressed he was, and finally, we get the flashback revealing the truth of the forest battle. At the very last second, the protagonist shoved his teammate aside. He took the orc's massive axe directly to his chest. He collapsed backward, and for a terrifying moment, his teammates thought he was done for. But then, his skill, Guardian's Will, erupted. It instantly healed his wounds and granted a massive defense buff. Back in the present, Myung-min slides a contract across the table. He says a feat like that is 1 in a million and asks him to join the Rangers one more time. Kang is stunned. The Rangers are a legendary group that only recruits special cases. And they want him? It feels too good to be true. He reaches for the pen, but hesitates. His survival instincts kick in. He needs to think this through. Rangers fight invaders and travel to other dimensions. It's the perfect playground for Asmodeus to ruin his life with impossible quests. And speaking of the devil, or rather, the goddess, the moment his finger brushes the paper, the text morphs before his eyes. A system window pops up. The 4th test is imminent. The objective? Join the Rangers and dedicate his life to protecting the world. Success means unlocking crucial hidden information. The system has cornered him. He has absolutely no choice but to accept. The protagonist rubs his eyes, double-checking the holographic text. He realizes he can clear this trial just by saying yes. Rage bubbles up inside him. That wretched goddess didn't even let him read the terms and conditions first. What if there's a slave clause in there? But with the system holding a gun to his head, he accepts the offer. Myung-min is shocked by the sudden agreement. He has no clue a deity is pulling the strings. However, the protagonist adds a condition: I'll only join as a mercenary. That way, even if Myung-min is his superior, Kang retains the freedom to cherry-pick his missions. Since the trial only demanded he accept the proposal, he decides he'll only take the jobs Asmodeus forces him to take. Myung-min agrees and thanks him for his cooperation. But behind that polite smile, he doesn't look too happy that his new recruit just outsmarted him on the employment terms. With the contract signed, he stood up to leave, believing his business was finished. But in that instant, reality itself seemed to warp. A sudden vertigo seized the protagonist. It felt as if a legion of souls was being violently ripped from his vessel all at once. The spiritual shock sent him stumbling. Myung called out in panic, asking if he was all right, as he stood frozen, trying to process the metaphysical assault. Kang-san waved him off, claiming he was fine, but internally, his mind was a blank slate of absolute confusion. Bizarre, chaotic images flashed before his eyes. He realized this was the special information he had been promised to direct data download into his brain. However, the nature of those visions remains a mystery for now, as the story abruptly cuts to 1 week later. Kang-san stood shivering at a desolate bus terminal, bundled up against the biting cold. The intel he received concerned the dark history of his past life as a demon. The download had hit him the moment the ink dried on the contract. It was so intense, so nauseating, that he had barely made it to the restroom before his stomach turned. Those memories guided him here, to Cheolwan in Gangwon province. His objective? To conquer a hidden dungeon awaiting him. and if he emerged victorious, he would claim a fragment of his lost Sula memory from his ancient past. The protagonist suspected this was Asmund's doing. The entity was trying to graft the memories of that demon back into his human mind. He recalled the lore. When reality tears open in the sky, it is called a link. But when the earth itself cracks open to the abyss, that is a dungeon. Buried deep underground, they are notoriously difficult to breach. Witnesses often describe a new dungeon opening as if the gates of hell itself had yawned wide. And somewhere within this uncharted subterranean nightmare lay the hidden truths of the protagonist's past existence. Standing before the gaping maw of the cave that led into the dark, the protagonist admitted he didn't know why Asmund wanted to reveal these memories. But a sense of impending doom had haunted him all week, and he needed to find the source. Protagonist resolved to step into the abyss. But first, he cast a magical barrier over the entrance to ensure no monsters could escape to the surface. That is the cardinal rule of dungeon exploration. Always contain the breach. Rule number 2 was preparation. Rations and gear were vital, as time loses meaning underground. And light? Essential, in the absolute void of the deep. It took him a moment to fumble for his equipment, but the instant his flashlight cut through the gloom, a massive, grinning skull filled his vision. He let out a terrified yelp. It was a squad of skeleton soldiers, weapons drawn. His instincts screamed that this was no ordinary encounter. In the past, a single bag of bones would have been a death sentence. Now, he was staring down 5 of them at once. But Kang San was no longer that weakling. Forged in the fires of countless deaths and failures, he had learned to stand on his own 2 feet. His blade danced, shattering ribs and skulls. He explained that while the undead feel no pain and attack relentlessly, they have a fatal weakness: divine energy. That specific attribute causes monsters of the dark alignment to not just break, but instantly disintegrate into dust. The protagonist smirked, realizing that if every monster in this hellhole shared that weakness, this raid might just be a walk in the park. Limbering up, he noted that the creeping dread he felt outside was fading. The deeper he ventured, the more his confidence returned. Kang even dared to hope that Asmund might have finally decided to give him a real gift after all the trials he had endured. He had survived death too many times to count. Surely he earned the treasure chest that suddenly appeared right in his path? Grinning like a fool, he dashed toward the loot, whispering thanks to the heavens. But his gratitude was premature. A massive shadow surged from the darkness, slamming into him with the force of a freight train. The attacker revealed itself a hulking nightmare wielding a massive steel flail. It was a Doulahan, a headless knight of the abyss, spinning that devastating steel ball on a chain like a toy. The chain whipped out. Kang San ducked by a hair's breadth, channeling mana to reinforce his blade, just as he had in previous battles. He struck back, but sparks flew. The Doulahan's armor was impregnable. His blade couldn't even leave a scratch on the steel plate. He was so focused on the offense that he missed the spiked wrecking ball swinging back for a second pass. He raised his sword in a desperate guard, but the impact sent him flying. Even with magic enhancement, the kinetic energy was overwhelming. He realized this monster was in a league of its own. To make matters worse, a spiderweb crack appeared on his sword from the impact. Kang San danced on the edge of a razor, frantically dodging the Doulahan's relentless assault. He knew if his weapon shattered, he would be reduced to a stain on the dungeon floor against a D-rank monster. However, clarity struck him amidst the chaos. The quest from Asmund only said to clear the dungeon. It never specified how. Who said he was obligated to risk his life in a head-on collision with this headless tank? Realization struck him like a thunderbolt. This chest was the legendary reward Asmund had foretold. With zero time for questions, he snatched the treasure and prepared to bolt. However, a deadly obstacle remained. He needed a strategy to bypass the Doulahan to secure his escape. The question burned in his mind: how could a headless abomination track his location with such terrifying precision? For a split second, he considered sprinting blindly like a madman, hoping luck was on his side. But then, a sharp realization pierced through the panic. The headless knight was blind. Yes, but his spectral steed was not. The beast was using its glowing eyes to lock onto his every move. Seizing the initiative, he hurled his lantern high into the air, the sudden flare blinding the spectral horse for a few crucial seconds. The Dullahan roared in confusion at the beast's erratic movements, swinging its massive iron flail in a blind rage. The protagonist didn't hesitate, diving through the opening. Yet, amidst the chaotic whirlwind of steel and shadows, the knight managed to reorient itself, pointing a silent, accusatory finger directly at his retreating form. But Kang was no fool to wait for death. He dashed toward the dungeon's exit. That was when horror struck. He had forgotten the very barrier he had erected earlier. He cursed his own thoroughness, realizing the magical wall didn't just block monsters. It trapped humans inside just as effectively, and deactivating the complex seal would take precious time he didn't have. Then, a miracle defied all logic. For the first time in his wretched life, luck was on his side. The barrier dissolved instantly, allowing him to burst out of the cave with his life intact. Behind him, the cavern groaned and collapsed in a cloud of dust, sealing the entrance forever. He realized with relief that he wouldn't need to waste mana sealing the place ever again. With the adrenaline finally fading, the protagonist settled down to inspect his prize. Inside the chest lay a skill book and, rather bizarrely, a simple glass vial of water. He downed the skill elixir without hesitation. A surge of energy announced the upgrade of his guardian shield, significantly boosting both his healing factor and defensive capabilities. He couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. It seemed fate was determined to make him the ultimate meat shield, as only his tanking abilities were seeing any growth. Pushing aside his mixed feelings, he turned his attention to the mysterious bottle of water. He recalled how he used to mock the concept of reincarnation as absolute garbage. Yet, every single word Asmount had spoken was turning into terrifying reality. Divine interference or not, he didn't care. If unlocking these lost memories was the key to forging the life he desired, he would pay any price necessary. He swallowed the liquid, and the world dissolved. His consciousness was instantly pulled into a vivid vision of a forgotten era. He saw a swordsman named Han Yun of the Volcano sect standing amidst fallen warriors. With burning resolve, the swordsman swore upon his name to slay a specific wicked demon. Han Yun pointed his blade at a solitary figure in the middle of the battlefield, challenging him to a duel. The entity surged toward the swordsman like a dark comet, and blades clashed, but the confrontation ended in the blink of an eye. The scene shifted instantly. The proud warrior lay broken in the dirt, utterly defeated, his mind racing to comprehend the gap in their power. As the demon loomed over the battlefield like a god of death, the broken warrior gasped out a question, demanding to know why he had slaughtered so many innocent souls. Images of happy families flashed through his mind, abruptly cut short by the haunting sight of a lone child weeping amidst the corpses. The demon merely scratched his head, looking genuinely puzzled. He couldn't understand why the warrior was searching for a profound reason behind the carnage. He stepped closer to the fallen hero, and as the shadows lifted from his face, a shocking truth was revealed. We see that he bore the exact same face as Kang San. With a chilling smile, he gave his answer. There was no grand plan. He destroyed simply because it brought him pleasure. The warrior froze in horror at the senseless cruelty. He never got the chance to process it, as the demon delivered the final, fatal strike. The memory shattered like glass. The protagonist gasped, finding himself back in the silent forest, standing alone before the empty chest. Despite the trauma of seeing his past self as a monster, he realized he had inherited two powerful new abilities from the vision. The first was the demon's intellect. Aside from a permanent boost to his attack power, it would also amplify his strength every time he laid an enemy low. Once he achieved 100 takedowns, the skill would evolve. The second ability was a martial art, the first form of the demonic sword. This technique unleashed a devastating slash that not only amplified his offensive power, but also inflicted a crippling status effect on his victims. As he analyzed his new powers, a dark cloud settled over his mind. Memories of his current life began to surface the tragic death of his parents, the vultures fighting over the inheritance, and the horrific bus crash that had left so many broken. The terrible truth dawned on him. He realized that all those tragedies weren't random bad luck. They were punishment, karmic retribution for the atrocities he had committed in his past life. From the loss of his family to the strangers maimed in accidents, everyone had suffered simply because they were near a monster like him. Just as the guilt threatened to consume him, his phone rang. It was Yoon Min Yuk, an old acquaintance, asking if he was interested in a small job. The scene shifted to the city, where the protagonist arrived at a restaurant to meet Min Yuk face to face. Min Yuk smiled, noting it had been a long time, and mentioned hearing rumors about the protagonist's recent promotion. He offered the protagonist a spot on his management team in Cheon-ho-seong. But the protagonist, still drowning in the guilt of his past, simply stared blankly, barely registering. The protagonist couldn't shake the suspicion clouding his mind, finding the offer bizarre because that guild was the undisputed #1 titan in the industry. Why would they possess even a shred of interest in someone like him? But the strangest detail was Min Hyuk. He had retired from the hunter lifestyle ages ago. The protagonist didn't know why, but at least his friend had landed a cushy corporate job. Before he could weigh the risks of accepting, the protagonist was suddenly pulled under by the riptide of memory, suffering another flashback of his tragic history. He was back on a scooter, riding towards school. He was riding alongside a classmate when disaster struck, sending them both crashing to the pavement. The protagonist insisted he was unhurt, but the other boy's internal monologue was venomous, complaining that walking with the protagonist was a one-way ticket to pain. The boy's mockery turned cruel, calling the protagonist a walking curse and suggesting he probably sent his own parents to an early grave too. Rage ignited in the protagonist's eyes, but before he could snap, Min Yuk stepped in, demanding to know if those were words a human should ever say to a friend. The bully asked why he was screaming, but Min Hyuk stood his ground, declaring, "There are lines you simply do not cross in this world." He commanded the boy to apologize immediately to the Phais. Protagonist, who, trying to diffuse the tension, accepted the hollow apology and said it was fine. Min Hyuk then hopped on his scooter, signaling the protagonist to follow him as security guided the students away. The memory faded, snapping back to the present. Min Hyuk insisted that the protagonist was ready for high-level raids now that he had finally climbed to rank E. He argued that having a massive guild's backing was crucial. They could handpick elite teammates to carry him and accelerate his growth as a hunter. Yet, the protagonist couldn't scrub the blood of the past from his mind. His memories as a demon king haunted him, making him question if a monster like him deserved to play the hero. He confessed to Min Hyuk that he didn't come for business, he just wanted to see his old friend's face after all these years. The protagonist tried to ask a burning question, but Min Hyuk cut him off cold, claiming the protagonist's promotion wasn't due to actual skill. He brutally suggested that reaching rank E was likely just a pity pass from a soft-hearted examiner. After all, even a failed hunter could look successful if they were carried by the right people. He kept pushing the contract, trying to manipulate the protagonist into joining, but suddenly, a disturbance rippled through the protagonist's senses. Another vision of his demonic era crashed into him, bringing a wave of nausea just like before. Min Hyuk feigned concern, asking if he was okay, using the moment to imply that if he was this weak, he definitely needed an agent to manage him. But the sickness wasn't from weakness, it was a reaction to a notification on his phone. He had officially joined the Rangers team. He apologized to Min Hyuk for the abrupt exit, knowing it had been an eternity since they last spoke. But the wheels of fate were turning, and he couldn't stay. He reiterated that he really just came to thank his friend. Min Hyuk, defeated, said it was fine. He handed over the phone the protagonist had left on the table, but their farewell was shattered by a breaking news alert. An S-rank gate had ruptured nearby. The very restaurant they sat in was now ground zero for a catastrophic dungeon break. Min Hyuk panicked, yelling that they needed shelter, while the protagonist urged everyone to follow the crowd, rushing towards safety. But it was too late. A massive lizard man wielding a giant trident smashed through the window, destroying everything in its path. It overturned tables and pinned a desperate customer who was scrambling to escape the beast's wrath. The man screamed for salvation as his wife watched in paralyzed horror. The protagonist realized this was the moment of truth. Min-hyuk gripped his shoulder tightly, insisting they flee immediately, warning that a swarm of monsters was incoming and nobody would blame a low-rank hunter for running to save his own skin. He begged the protagonist to stop playing the hero and escape before they were both torn to shreds. But the protagonist was trapped in a nightmare loop. The monster already had a human impaled on its weapon and was preparing to skewer the man on the floor. Deep in his soul, the protagonist knew he could not let history repeat itself. Flashes of the thousands he had slaughtered in his past life assaulted his mind. Resolve hardened his heart. He activated the demon sword arts, launching himself at the enemy with a devastating, lightning-fast strike. The impact sent the monster flying. The old man scrambled back to his wife while Min-hyuk stood there, jaw dropped, stunned by the protagonist's hidden power. The protagonist declared that he was no longer the demon of the past, ordering the civilians to run before the horde arrived. While Min-hyuk stared in absolute shock, the protagonist vowed to prove to the world just how much he had evolved. The scene shifts to the aftermath. Police lights flash as authorities secure the survivors of the brutal Lizardman assault. Min-wook held the phone with a trembling hand, the voice on the other end demanding to know if the recruitment was a success. He swallowed hard and admitted defeat, confessing it was impossible, which only ignited a storm of fury from his superior. The executive spat venom, declaring Min-wook utterly incompetent, unable to handle even the simplest task. He roared that it didn't matter if Kang was a measly F rank or E rank, the company's prestige alone should have brought him to his knees. Min-wook tried to stammer an apology, but the line went dead, the call cut short by the sheer arrogance of his boss. Letting out a heavy sigh of relief, Min-wook thought back to the monster he saw in that dungeon, realizing the executive had no idea who Kang truly was. Meanwhile, back on the chaotic battlefield, we see that while the restaurant remained a sanctuary, the streets outside had become a slaughterhouse, with waves of lizard men hunting down helpless civilians. Our protagonist fought like a demon to protect them, but the sheer number of enemies was suffocating, turning the tide against him. Desperate, he triggered the Shield of Trials to draw their aggro, but the chaos was too great, and the beastly horde ignored his taunt. The grim reality set in. He was severely disadvantaged, but he knew the military would arrive in minutes, meaning he just had to hold the line and become an unmovable wall until then. A spear thrust nearly ended him, but in that split second, he activated Guardian's will, his defense skyrocketing instantly. With his skin now hard as iron, he deflected the blow and countered, sending the creature flying. Ironically, the overwhelming odds were in his favor, as his passive skill boosted his defense for every enemy present on the field. Seizing the momentum, Kang unleashed a flurry of sword strikes, cutting down the front line, yet the horde seemed endless, threatening to drown him in numbers if he made even a single mistake. However, the tables had turned thanks to his new ability, Demon's IQ, which stacked his attack power higher with every kill he claimed. For a fleeting second, he became mesmerized by the blood on his blade, only to be snapped back to reality by the terrified scream of a civilian nearby. Finally, salvation arrived. The military truck screeched to a halt, unleashing a storm of bullets into the lizardmen ranks. The platoon leader barked orders, splitting the squad to secure the perimeter and hunt for survivors in the wreckage. Soldiers moved with precision, tending to the wounded and putting down any straggling monsters with extreme prejudice. But as one soldier sifted through the debris, he stumbled upon a gruesome sight. The protagonist, lying broken on the ground, clutching his blood-soaked blade. Recognition flashed in the soldier's eyes as he scooped up the fallen hero and rushed him to the commanding officer. Inside the command tent, they watched the surveillance footage, witnessing the impossible battle that had just occurred. The screen showed a lone warrior facing an army, dismantling the lizardmen one by one with pure, unadulterated hatred burning in his gaze. The commander, stunned, asked if this was a ranger, but the report was blank. The man had appeared from nowhere like a phantom. They assumed he was just an arrogant hunter playing hero, though they couldn't deny that his reckless bravery had saved countless lives. Yet, the commander's face hardened. He ordered the protagonist's immediate identification and arrest, citing protocol over heroism. He argued that allowing incompetent hunters to run wild would only create a bureaucratic nightmare down the road. But the soldier hesitated, his voice trembling as he pointed out a much graver issue. Looking at the protagonist's battered body, it wasn't a question of arrest, but whether the man was even still alive. Miraculously, Kang's eyes fluttered open, revealing his savior was none other than Kim Chun-sik, the very man he had saved in the dungeon earlier. Memories flooded back, and Kang weakly asked about Kim's grandmother's surgery, ignoring his own broken state. Kim was floored, unable to comprehend how this man could worry about others after slaughtering an entire horde single-handedly. But the protagonist simply gritted his teeth, forcing himself up, insisting he had to leave immediately. Kang stumbled forward, his legs shaking, but Kim stopped him, warning that he wouldn't make it 10 feet in that condition. As predicted, Kang's strength failed him, and he collapsed, forcing Kim to realize the injuries were far more critical than they appeared. Kim knew the law since Kang was an unregistered F rank. Being found like this meant a one-way ticket to prison. But Kim Chun-sik was a man of honor. He refused to let the savior to whom he owed his life be shackled like a criminal. Hoisting Kang onto his back, he slipped away into the shadows, risking his own safety to protect the unconscious hero. The scene shifts, fading into the sterile white of a hospital room, where the protagonist woke to the gentle face of Kim's grandmother, who explained he was safe within the medical ward. She soothed his worries, telling him to rest, explaining that while it looked like he was at death's door, the doctors confirmed he had cheated the Reaper once again. The kindly old woman offered him fresh apple slices, her voice a soothing balm as she urged him to eat, sleep, and follow the doctor's orders. She spoke with deep emotion, revealing that he was the very savior who had rescued her grandson. She had waited a lifetime for this meeting, having heard legends of his incredible heroism. The protagonist took a bite, and the sweetness exploded. On his tongue it was the most divine flavor he had tasted in ages. A wave of nostalgia washed over him, transporting him back to the days when his mother was still alive to care for him. Outside, the media storm was brewing as a reporter went live announcing the tragedy that had struck the Ranki Gate in Gwansimi. She turned to a soldier, pressing for answers about the missing civilian and asking if any witness testimonies had been gathered. The soldier shook his head, admitting that by the time he arrived to assist the young man, the monsters had already been slaughtered. All praise was directed at the hunter known as KH. Thanks to this lone hero, ordinary people had survived the catastrophe. The soldier continued his eulogy of gratitude, while our protagonist sat in confusion, wondering why they were making such a scene. But pushing the accolades aside, a cold realization settled in his gut. The world was now more dangerous than ever before. He continued his internal monologue. This was no simple trial handed down by the heavens, but a lonely war he had chosen to fight. His mind drifted back to the blood-soaked chaos of his duel with the beast. With a desperate strike, he had managed to sever one of the creature's limbs, steel clashing against thick hide. Corpses were stacking up around him like a macabre wall, yet the mutant lizards kept swarming like an endless tide. Realizing the stalemate, he gritted his teeth. Even after felling 10 of the abominations, the horde showed no sign of weakening. But then, the system intervened. His demonic ability ignited, causing his attack power to surge temporarily. An elder lizard charged forward, its spear tip gleaming with deadly intent. It tried to catch the main character off guard, but he was no longer prey. Evolved and stronger, he sent wave after wave of lizards to their graves. Triggering the scent of blood skill, he leaped into the fray, and his wild demonic nature partially awakened. Drenched in the visceral gore of the monster, he felt a terrifying shift. His body moved automatically, unleashing violence independent of his will. Skill after skill chained together as he became an unstoppable, implacable force of destruction. He stood amidst a circle of carnage. Every fallen body shared one gruesome thing in common. They littered the ground, defeated, Yet despite his overwhelming strength, his stamina had bottomed out, leaving him exhausted. The blood power raged on, but a saving grace appeared. The Guardian skill activated, restoring his health points and cleansing his status. Back in the safety of the hospital, he reflected, if not for the Guardian skill, the madness that the system forced upon him might have consumed his very soul. It was safer to assume that the blood power was an anomaly, a skill so eldritch that even the system glitched when explaining it. Lost in his dark brooding, he barely noticed the hand extending toward him with fruit. The elderly woman, hospitalized alongside him, offered the apples to speed his recovery, praising the hero of the disaster. She then whispered a miracle. Someone had anonymously donated the funds for her life-saving surgery. The main character remained silent, hiding the truth that he was the donor. After all, she was his own grandmother. She marveled at the sanity of a stranger giving so much, never suspecting he had transferred it directly from his own account. She confessed how difficult it was to accept such charity. For the surgery, that was when the main character interjected, asking why the procedure hadn't happened yet. She smiled, saying she had finally accepted the money and the doctors might operate as soon as next week. Shifting the topic, Kay asked a heavy question. What were the requirements to receive a guardian's blessing? But the lady interrupted, speaking of her grandson who grew up alone. To her, his survival was the only blessing that mattered. Kay tried to keep eating, but her emotional words formed a lump in his throat that was hard to swallow. It was a moment of clarity. He was different from the monsters he hunted. His heart still found joy in saving others. He wished her luck with the surgery, and the system Chimidhi's divine power and faith attributes had leveled up. Rehabilitation complete, the main character stood before a building surrounded by high-level protection. He rolled up his sleeves, eyes burning with conviction to uncover the truth of the demonic blood. He muttered about the risks, knowing that relying on such a volatile skill in real combat was a dangerous gamble. To master his chaotic power, he needs a facility that can handle his potential. Even a basic training center will serve as the first step on his path to supremacy. The gatekeeper verifies his credentials, confirming his entry into the isolation zone. But there is a catch. Once the protagonist steps inside, the seal will not break until a full month has passed. He accepts the terms without hesitation. The assistant nods, informing him that the system itself will reveal the true nature of his training inside. A sharp-eyed inspector steps forward, her presence commanding as she guides him toward the chamber of trials. Instinct warns him that something is off. The atmosphere has shifted, and the usual guardian is missing from his post. She lays out the brutal rules. 20 monsters will spawn daily. Slaughter them all, and he must wait 24 hours for the next wave of carnage. As the heavy door locks behind him, a grin spreads across his face. Finally, he can unleash his full strength and ascend to the next level. But before he can begin, the woman's voice cuts through the air. This is no ordinary training. It is the 5th trial, a penalty for his past karma. She reveals the cruel reality of this dimension. Time is distorted here. 30 days in the real world will stretch into 300 agonizing days of survival within. Yet, high risk brings high reward. With a wave of her hand, she promises a bounty of 5 divine levels if he survives the ordeal. The sheer insanity of the challenge leaves him completely speechless. A month has passed in the outside world. The system chimes with a golden notification the hellish training is finally complete. Emerging from the abyss, he hands his identification to the reception desk. A changed man. The receptionist freezes. The rookie who entered is gone, replaced by a warrior radiating a terrifying and majestic new aura. His physical transformation is absolute. Looking like a sculpted god, he decides he needs a fresh style to match his newfound power. At the salon, the tension of 300 days melts away as the stylist tends to his flowing hair. He sinks into a luxurious bath, washing away the blood and sweat of battle before stepping out to find a feast worthy of a king. He devours a meal at a local restaurant, savoring the peace he fought so hard to regain. His hunger is a bottomless pit, nearly consuming the bowl itself, before he caps off the victory with a sweet ice cream treat. Finally, reaching the sanctuary of his home, nature calls with the force of a hurricane. He sprints to the bathroom and slams the lock shut. After exercising his demons in the restroom, our hero collapses on the floor, utterly drained by the return to civilization. Hours drift by as he recovers, until the system flashes a message congratulating him on conquering the fifth trial. A new dawn breaks over Sanhee, but peace is nowhere to be found. Heavily armored goblins erupt onto the streets, smashing the city to pieces with brutal clubs. The hunt is on. Targets confirmed. The military engages, but their weapons barely scratch the thick hides of these monsters. Bloodlust burns in the goblin's eyes as it rampages, turning the district into a graveyard. A soldier unloads his entire clip. The beast charges, ripping a car door off its hinges to deflect the hail of bullets like a toy shield. But human tenacity prevails. The shots find their mark, and the monster stumbles. The soldier lets out a breath of relief, having taken down a first-class goblin. The squad retreats to the safety of their transport. Amidst the chaos, he dials a number, warning his family to stay safe in this dangerous new world. His squad mate asks if he is checking on his little brother again. Chunsik nods with a weary smile. One soldier praises his brotherly devotion, while the other scoffs, calling it pointless sentimentality on the battlefield. They gaze at the photo together, oblivious to the curse. In this genre, showing a picture of your family is the ultimate death flag. Their banter is cut short. A recruit rushes in on. Inspector is demanding to see Mr. Chin Chun immediately. The brown-haired warrior freezes. Hearing that an inspector is calling his name sends a shiver of dread down his spine. A woman named Menyon steps forward, claiming to be a reporter. His guard goes up. Instantly, she reeks of trouble. She cuts to the chase. She is hunting for information on the mysterious E-rank warrior who possesses skills that defy the laws of nature. Realizing she is sniffing around the hidden ace, Chun shuts his mouth tight. He refuses to leak a single word. She changes tactics, claiming she understands his need for secrecy, pretending to be an ally who shares his vision. But her silver tongue is not enough to pierce Chun's ironclad loyalty. He remains unmoved. The reporter sharpens her gaze. She argues that true secrecy does not look like vanity, and his clumsy attempt to hide the truth is only exposing it more. He realizes too late that her words were a trap, and he has walked right into it. Sweat pours down his face like rain. She smiles, knowing that pressure alone will not break him, so she reaches into her bag. Instead of a threat, she slides a mysterious package into his hands. The game has just changed. Out of nowhere, the delivery driver's voice cut through the air, forcing him to snatch the package instantly, no questions asked. The woman seemed satisfied with a job well done. Back in the sanctuary of his dorm room, he held the mysterious parcel tight while drying his hair. The contents within were nothing less than a token of appreciation from the reporter, a small gift to express her profound gratitude. Sitting down, he prepared to unveil the mystery, tearing open the envelope to reveal what lay inside. Inside lay documents revealing bank transfers in Kang's name. The scene shifts to the bank, where the injured friend sat recovering, explaining that this miracle occurred after being saved by. Realizing that the status quo could not continue, he knew he had to take drastic action. His first move was a humble offering of coffee to the hospital nurses, a gesture of goodwill. Both nurses thanked him, their eyes heavy with exhaustion from the endless shift. He seized this moment to ask the dreaded question about the unpaid hospital bills. But just then, he was interrupted. Someone had indeed been looking for him to discuss that very matter. The shock hit him like a physical blow. He began to beg, pleading with them not to evict his grandmother from her hospital bed. But the nurse interrupted, her voice gentle, revealing that the bills had already been settled. In his desperation, the woman's words didn't register at first. She repeated herself, clarifying that an anonymous donor had provided the funds for both him and his grandmother. The truth finally sank in, and tears of pure relief streamed down his face. He wept openly over the transfer papers signed by Kang, his heart overflowing with joy. Yet, amidst this overwhelming happiness, a pang of regret struck him. He had no way to thank his shadow benefactor. Wiping the tears from his eyes, he voiced his gratitude aloud once more. The weight on his shoulders finally lifted. With renewed purpose, he reached into his pocket. His goal now was clear-call the reporter and uncover the identity of this savior. Seconds later, the woman's phone exploded with notifications, a smile spreading across her face. She knew exactly who was calling, but she bore the burden of sad news. She could not reveal the identity of the person he sought. However, the vague answers she received were making her restless. Impatience and curiosity began to bubble within her. That was the pitiful state of the reporter, desperate for a scoop, but hitting a wall of silence. "The scoop of the century won't escape my grasp," she declared, her thirst for information unquenchable. At that exact moment, miles away, the protagonist felt a sudden chill run from his toes to the top of his head. Meanwhile, the protagonist gathered with a party to enter the black portal once more. Hero Joan thanked Kang for joining, but warned of the deadly risks within the dense fog. Another hero, an E-rank hunter known as Yun Chan, began to voice his dissatisfaction. He questioned what the exploration team had been doing, furious that they hadn't warned them about this blinding mist. The D-rank hunter chose silence, his expression grim as he too was clueless about the situation. But the protagonist simply grumbled that the fog appeared the moment he arrived, wondering if it was bad karma. He noted that this was a problem beyond their control. He explained that while visibility would be abysmal, they could still distinguish shapes from about 10 meters away. Hearing this, another party member asked if the protagonist meant they should just wait there blindly. However, Kang produced a jar of honey from his bag, a tool that would serve as their compass in this white abyss. Time passed, and the surrounding area revealed itself to be a wasteland, utterly destroyed by intense battles. June continued to mock him, asking what kind of idiot brings honey to a raid, claiming he had never heard of such a ridiculous strategy. As the protagonist spread the sticky liquid, Chan hesitated, doubting if he should follow this madness blindly. Just as Jun Chan complained about the visibility again, the alarm bell rang out, shattering the silence. Kang instantly shifted into a combat stance, his senses heightened. At the same time, a massive creature began to emerge from the shadows. With the monsters closing in, the protagonist warned of their arrival, readying himself for the clash. The three men scrambled, using the rocks as cover to shield themselves from the impending onslaught. Meanwhile, the healer trembled in fear, the heavy footsteps of the monster shaking his very core. One of the mutant ants approached the honey-smeared rocks. The scent of the honey drove them into a frenzy, and they began to emit strange, high-pitched screeches. The protagonist launched his assault, striking them one by one as his defensive skill increased by 5%. He drove his sword into the ant's chitin, taking it down effortlessly. But while he focused on a single target, the others seized the opportunity to launch a coordinated attack. Yet, this treacherous ambush was not enough to defeat Kang, who managed to block the strike just in time. However, one ant rose from the debris and shattered the rock, leaving him exposed and unable to retaliate. Without mercy, the ant began to rain blows on a critical spot on his head, but the protagonist broke free and delivered a devastating slash, cleaving the beast in two. Seizing the opening, the archer loosed one of his arrows into the fray. His arrows found their mark with lethal precision, claiming a double kill in the blink of an eye. But in this chaotic dungeon, perfection is a myth. A stray arrow nearly took the protagonist's head off, leaving a fatal opening for a mutant to strike. Or so it seemed, until the beast was cleaved in two. The redhead hoisted his gore-stained axe, letting out a heavy sigh of relief amidst the carnage. Witnessing such raw power, the observer stood in awe. These weren't just rookies, they were warriors, unfazed by the chaos of battle. However, the trembling healer was a completely different story. Their brief respite was shattered by a thunderous roar that shook the very foundations of the cave, startling even our protagonist. Just as the system chimed to announce a skill upgrade, the swarm descended. More and more ants poured in like a black tide. The cacophony was deafening, masking the enemy's location. The healer, paralyzed by terror, couldn't believe his nightmare was coming true. The insectoid horde surged forward. One breached their line, lunging for the healer who barely raised his staff in defense. But the redhead noticed the danger. Death seemed imminent, and the only thing waiting for the healer was excruciating pain. S-Chan watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend why the guy was acting so foolishly on the battlefield. Panic gripped the squad, but the protagonist moved faster than thought, intervening just in time to save the healer's life. Yet, the beast's mandibles still found a target. It wasn't the healer, but Kang's arm that was crushed between those jaws. The ant clamped down with bone-crushing force, but the protagonist simply hardened his muscles. Not a single drop of blood was spilled. The iron body skill had activated, turning his flesh into fortress walls. With zero hesitation, Kant obliterated the creature with a single, devastating punch. A clean, decisive kill. He stood there, commanding absolute respect on the battlefield, eyes scanning for a worthy challenge. Suddenly, a notification flashed before his eyes. The system had redirected all monster aggression straight toward him. As the pile of insect corpses grew, the archer could only sigh, his mind unable to process the spectacle unfolding before him. Doubt began to ripple through the party. Was this monster really just an E-rank hunter? His power defied all logic. The pointed-eared archer couldn't help but blush, staring at the protagonist with newfound admiration. He finally asked the question on everyone's mind. How did he become this powerful so quickly? That question dragged Kang's mind back to the hellish training center memories of blood, sweat, and agony flooding his thoughts. He couldn't reveal the system's secrets, so he simply shrugged, claiming it was nothing but good old-fashioned hard work. To dodge further interrogation, he quickly shifted the topic, suggesting they focus on the mission rather than his past. The axe-wielding redhead grinned, declaring that with Kang on their side, even the unpredictable dungeon seemed manageable. Kang thanked him for the trust, while Yoon chimed in, admitting he'd never seen such a capable tank in their squad. But despite the victory, Yoon's expression darkened. There was one frantic element of the battle he couldn't overlook. He turned his cold gaze toward the healer, scathing words flying like daggers. "You did nothing! Why are you even here?" Those harsh words struck a nerve, and even Kan had to silently agree with Yoon's brutal assessment. Yoon continued his tirade, pointing out how the redhead held the rear and the archer took the front, functioning like a proper team. But the mage healer? He had done nothing but cower behind rocks like a frightened child. He demanded to know why the guy joined the party at all. Before the group could fracture completely, the archer stepped in to de-escalate the tension. He tried to speak on the healer's behalf, but as the words left his lips, a sinister rumble began to emanate from the earth. The ground beneath them groaned and shattered. Violent tremors ripped the floor apart, sending the entire party plummeting into the dark abyss below. As they fell, the system flashed an ominous red warning. Karma and dungeon difficulty had just skyrocketed. Miraculously, the group survived the fall, battered and bruised, but still breathing amidst the rubble. Kang's eyes narrowed. They had fallen straight into the heart of the anthill. The system chimed again, boosting his defense and health in response to the overwhelming number of enemies. Realizing they were completely screwed, Jump began to panic, screaming that a warrior ant was inbound. And there it was, a rank C mutant standing 170 centimeters tall, stalking toward them with murderous intent. Cold sweat ran down the protagonist's back. Falling into a rank C zone wasn't just bad luck, it was a death sentence. Meanwhile, the useless healer looked green, overcome by nausea and terror. Kang approached him, demanding to know what was wrong with Boban. The green-haired archer turned, his face grim as he prepared to reveal the unfortunate truth. He revealed that Wubin had suffered severe trauma from monsters since childhood. Hearing this, Jun's frustration boiled over into pure rage. He roared at the archer, asking why on earth they would bring a liability on such a critical mission. Was he insane? The entire group froze, shocked by Yun-chan's outburst, but deep down, they knew he was speaking the harsh truth. Yun-chan didn't let up. As if falling into a monster nest wasn't bad enough, now they had to babysit a useless mage while fighting for their lives. While the team wasted precious breath debating the morality of their situation, the system chimed with a grim notification for Conte. Abilities boosted by 35%. But panic had already seized June. Convinced his death was imminent, he lashed out, demanding Gubin and Anul take responsibility. The main character saw the fear spreading like a virus. He knew he had to crush that panic instantly, or the situation would spiral from dangerous to deadly. In a dungeon, a clouded mind leads to a swift death. The protagonists knew if they lost their cool, their skills would be utterly useless. He stepped in, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. He told Yoon he understood the terror gripping his heart. After all, this was a high-level raid, a nightmare scenario the boy had never faced before. "Focus on the battle! Trust in me," the main character commanded. He pointed to the terrain. "Look, no matter how many millions come, there is only one narrow path they can take." Then, with steel in his eyes, the main character asked, "Can you hold the line? Can you watch my back?" June swallowed his fear. He nodded, vowing to give it everything he had. He ordered Anul to secure the smaller tunnels the moment their mage pulled himself together. Cand and his party braced themselves. The mutant ants were coming. Internal sensors pinged, 35 hostiles waiting to be slaughtered. But to him, this wasn't a death sentence. It was just another training montage to conquer. However, a shadow of doubt lingered. If these were all high-rank soldier ants, this fight would be hell. An ant lunged. Guardian protection activated instantly, but the pressure was immense. For now, he was a one-man army holding back the tide alone. They were fast. They were powerful. He had to create a mountain of corpses right here before they could breach the tunnel exit. There was no time for hesitation. The main character launched himself back into the fray with zero mercy. His blade sang through the air, knocking a monster back. He reactivated his blood demon art, but this time he unleashed the second form. The beast gave him no quarter. Ignoring the pain, it charged straight for the main character's throat. Kang tanked the heavy blows. His defense had skyrocketed, but his attack power was lagging behind. Finally, one fell. He crushed its skull beneath his boot, ensuring the wretched creature would never rise again. But the swarm was endless. His shield began to crack and splinter under the relentless assault. With a single, devastating strike, he cleaved through 3 advancing enemies. But the cost was high. His energy was draining, and the loss count hit 10%. He had to gamble. Once more, he ignited his blood demon skills, forcing a temporary surge in attack power. It worked. With the grace of a grandmaster, he sliced through the charging horde like a hot knife through butter. His health and defense were plummeting into the red. Yet, his blood power surged, reaching new heights. A bold ambush from above. Useless. The main character skews the beast mid-air with his blade. Pain faded into the background. His determination hardened like steel because he knew he was winning. He became a whirlwind of destruction, charging forward as his power continued to climb. They poured from the ceiling. They crawled from the walls. The insect tide was unrelenting, pushing forward with zero fear. Yun-Chan fought with desperate courage, striking one down. But a silent predator slipped past his guard and clamped onto his arm. Panic threatened to consume him again. He tried to breathe, but the agony of the mandibles crushing his flesh was overwhelming. Desperate, he used his axe to launch a heavy boulder at the beast. A critical hit. The monster was crushed, but the victory came at a terrible price. His arm was mangled, totally incapacitated. Despair washed over him. He thought it was the end. Just as he accepted his fate, a presence materialized behind him, weaving mana into the air. Warmth enveloped his wound, flesh knit together, and bone mended. His arm was returning to its former glory. The healer was none other than the main character himself. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" he scolded. Little Yun-Chan stared in shock. Kang was bleeding. "Stop! Use that healing on yourself first," he screamed. The main character smirked, appreciating the loyalty, but he shook his head. "You need this more than I do right now." They stood shoulder to shoulder, brothers in arms, ready to face death together if necessary. As Kang finally prepared a healing spell for himself, the enemy struck. Caught off guard, the main character barely managed to raise his defense in the nick of time. Bodies piled up, but the wave never ended. It was a battle of attrition now. They had to manage every ounce of stamina. Gritting his teeth, Kang shouted into the darkness, "How many more of these things are hiding in that hole?" Meanwhile, poor Bobin remained frozen, paralyzed by the trauma of the monsters. "Why me?" he whimpered, drowning in self-pity. Guilt gnawed at him as he watched his comrades bleed and struggle against the horde. Anul screamed at him to snap out of it, but Gubin just shook his head, refusing to accept the nightmare before his eyes. His cowardice wasn't just pathetic, it was dangerous. Fury boiled over in Yoon and the archer. Watching their friend surrender to fear was a sight they couldn't forgive. Seizing the panicked mage by the collar, he shook him violently, desperate to snap him out of his trance. A sharp slap echoed through the chaos. He roared, forcing the trembling boy to face reality their comrades were dancing with death just to keep him breathing right now. He screamed that if he had a death wish, he should perish alone, rather than dragging innocent souls down into the abyss with his cowardice. Silence. Not a single word could escape his throat. He was paralyzed, a prisoner within his own mind, lacking the strength to even lift a finger. Time seemed to warp. Through the haze of panic, a distant memory surfaced Handon's voice, speaking of a legendary figure he had met during the trials. Gasping for air, he listened to the echo. Handon had looked at him with pity, unable to bear the sight of his friend's broken spirit. He had offered a life lineage chance to join forces with that incredible stranger and finally shatter the chains of his past trauma. But that one word trauma acted like a key, unlocking a vault of nightmares the healer had tried so desperately to seal away. The floodgates opened, the screaming sirens, the crumbling city, and his family running for their lives from the gaping maw of a dungeon gate. Desperation fueled their escape, but his small legs failed him. As he collapsed, sobbing in pain, his mother pleaded with him to stand, but his body refused to obey. Realizing they were out of time, she pulled him close. "Hold on to me," she whispered. "Don't ever let go." He clung to her with every ounce of strength in his tiny body. But fate was cruel. A shadow loomed over them, and horror struck right before his innocent eyes. Tears streamed down his face, bridging the past and the present. Now, standing on the precipice of death, Bobin had to choose, remain a victim or evolve. The nightmares didn't break him this time. Instead, they ignited a spark. The terror in his eyes hardened into absolute resolve. He declared to Ambial that he would give his all. Closing his eyes, he channeled his grief into power, swearing that no one else would die because of his weakness today. Violent surges of mana began to radiate from his staff, humming with unstable energy. The sheer density of magic warped the air around them. Even as Kang held the front line, the system began screaming alerts. Something unprecedented was happening. Unknown error flashed repeatedly across the interface. The mage was channeling mana at a level that defied logic and safety limits. The archer unleashed a barrage of arrows, desperate to buy even 1 second of time for his teammate to finish the incantation. Bobin's eyes snapped open. He saw them, his comrades, bleeding, fighting, dying for him. Kang was cornered by the insectoid horde, yet he refused to yield. The beast within the boy was finally unleashed. A torrent of apocalyptic fire erupted, instantly turning the cavern into a blazing inferno. The legendary salamander of Yos had arrived. Its roar shook the dungeon's foundations, bringing with it a heat so intense it felt like the depths of hell itself. Responding to its summoner's rage, the elemental spirit charged, a relentless tide of destruction sweeping toward the enemy. Flames devoured everything in their path. Even Lido-chan could only stare in paralyzed awe at the sheer scale of the devastation. For a terrifying moment, the fiery behemoth rushed toward him, its jaws gaping wide. But it wasn't aiming for allies. It slammed past him, crashing directly into the ant tunnel. Even our main character had to admit this kid was a monster. He turned back, finally understanding the true weight of the burden Bobin had been carrying all this time. The dead weight was gone. The boy, who was once a burden, now commanded the battlefield with cleansing fire. But amidst the roar of flames, a command cut through. The protagonist shouted his orders, "Bring it down, collapse the tunnel, it is our only chance to stop the swarm." Even with this monstrous power, the insect tide was relentless. Boban gritted his teeth, pouring his very life force into executing the hero's command. But the swarm was mindless and unending, climbing over the bodies of their burning kin to reach fresh meat. One of the nightmare creatures broke through the defensive line, lunging straight for the defenseless mage. Kang didn't hesitate. Shield skill activated. He raised his blade, standing as an unmovable wall between the beast and his teammate. Ignoring his screaming muscles and exhaustion, he delivered a crushing blow. The soldier ant reeled back, its aggro shifting entirely to our hero. He had bought the opening they needed. With the enemy distracted, Boban was safe to finish the job. The summoner unleashed the final payload. Rocks shattered and the ceiling groaned, finally collapsing to seal the passage of doom. The power was magnificent, perhaps too much so. The entire cavern was destabilizing. If they didn't move now, they would be buried in their own victory. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Kang snatched up Yun Chan and sprinted like his life depended on it. Ahead, the archers screamed for them to move faster as the world crumbled behind them. With a deafening crash, the tunnel was sealed. Darkness swallowed the battlefield, leaving only silence and charred remains in its wake. Finally, safe in the shadows, the protagonist immediately began tending to the squad's critical wounds. Kang was on the verge of collapse, his body pushed past its limit, yet his mind remained on his team. Suddenly, space warped and Luca Bellino materialized. Her sudden arrival caught him off guard. With a cryptic smile, she announced that the 6th trial was complete. It was time for his due reward. The status window shimmered into existence. He knew the hellish grind required for a single stat point, but the system had more in store for him today. However, just as relief began to settle in, Kang faced the mysterious entity, his voice trembling with frustration as he demanded to know why innocent bystanders were being dragged into his hellish trials. The Guardian's gaze remained cold as she delivered the harsh truth his current power was insufficient, and without Gubin's intervention, failure would have been inevitable. She revealed that the variables of this dimension were chaotic and unpredictable, much like the sudden and unexpected arrival of the mage into their party. Her tone darkened as she scolded him, assuming the trial would be easier alone with sheer arrogance, and this twisted outcome was simply the weight of his own karma crashing down. Dismissing his concerns, she commanded him to silence his doubts and focus his entire being on surviving whatever deadly test the system threw at him next. With a dismissive wave of her hand, she asked if the lesson had sunk in, while Kang stared back, his expression hardened with grim determination. Before he could retort, she declared that if he truly understood, it was time to leave this spiritual plane and snap back to the harsh reality of the dungeon. Back in the physical world, the party watched with relief as our hero stirred, their faces lighting up as they frantically asked if he was still in one piece. Disoriented and groggy, Kang rubbed his head, asking if he had blacked out again, confused as to why they were still lingering in the depths of the dungeon. The archer sighed, gesturing to the sheer wall's escape was impossible, as the cave dropped 10 meters straight down and the smooth rock offered no handholds for climbing. After outlining their hopeless situation, the team admitted they had just been waiting for him to wake up, desperately hoping he might have a ridiculous item like a trampoline stashed away. John scoffed at the absurdity, asking why anyone would waste inventory space on such trash, and the archer chuckled, admitting it was just a dark joke to lighten the mood. But suddenly, Kang shattered the atmosphere. He looked them dead in the eye and revealed that, against all logic, he actually possessed that exact item. As their jaws hit the floor, Kang explained with a shrug that he kept such oddities for precisely these kinds of unpredictable disasters. Little Chan peered into the inventory, completely flabbergasted to see the main character hoarding ant bait and a chaotic pile of random scrolls like a pack rat. Wasting no time, Kang set up the device, instructing the team to step onto the trampoline and launch themselves with every ounce of strength they had. The first jump was merely a warm-up gathering momentum. They propelled themselves into a second, gravity-defying leap toward freedom. With a final surge of effort, they soared out of the abyss, landing safely on the surface just as the magical item began to dissolve into particles of light. A blue system window flashed before Kang's eyes, notifying him that the single-use consumable had been permanently removed from his inventory. Later, Kang's party returned to the Hunter's headquarters to report the mission failure, but the administration acknowledged the error and granted them access to a fresh raid instance. The other 3 members agreed to keep the mishap a secret, deciding to resolve the issue quietly amongst themselves rather than causing a scene. However, a cold sweat ran down the main character's back. He terrified that if this anomaly repeated itself, they could face a permanent ban from the Hunter Association. Lost in his anxious thoughts about the future, he was suddenly pulled back to reality by a soft hand, gently grabbing his own. Startled, he turned his head, his eyes widening as he wondered what could possibly be happening now. It was Gubin, holding on to him with desperate sincerity, asking if they could raid together again, vowing to become stronger so she would never be a burden to him again. Her genuine words warmed our hero's heart, and he smiled, reassuring her that they were a team and she had nothing to apologize for. The moment became tender, leaving the other 2 members whispering about how Kang seemed to turn into a poet whenever the atmosphere got a little too romantic. Watching the scene, Jun-chan suddenly recalled a crucial detail Kang had mentioned earlier, that he was a free agent, not yet signed to any guild management. With the debriefing complete, the group exchanged farewells, but John broke away from the pack, his expression shifting to one of calculation. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, and the scene shifted to the imposing skyscraper of the Kanan Sang Management Guild. On the other end of the line, a respectful voice confirmed the orders, acknowledging the request with absolute obedience. Inside the office, a younger assistant looked at the senior manager, asking what kind of troublesome call could make her sigh with such exhaustion. The manager rubbed her temples, explaining that she had just spoken to Little Chan and he was demanding they recruit a lowly rank E hunter immediately. The assistant gasped in disbelief, unable to comprehend why someone of Chan's stature would make such an outrageous request for a bottom-tier hunter. Reluctantly, the manager pulled up Kang's file, her eyes narrowing as she realized that until very recently, this man was nothing more than a hopeless rank F. But then she remembered Chan's intense warning: do not judge by the data, for this man possessed skills that defied logic, marking him as the greatest hunter he had ever seen. She knew better than to ignore a direct request from the higher-ups. Failing to secure this hunter now would only lead to catastrophic drama later on. Scanning the recruitment spreadsheet, her eyes locked onto the entry. It was indeed a formal recommendation submitted by Jun Chan-gu. The printer whirred to life, spitting out Kang's profile, where a male employee picked it up, scratching his head in confusion at the unknown name. As he muttered Kang's name aloud, his supervisor loomed over his shoulder, demanding to know who this nobody was, as the name rang no bells. Snatching the papers, the supervisor's eyes bulged in shock when he realized a low-rank hunter had received an official recommendation from the top. Background chatter suggested that Minyuk was stirring up trouble again, but the supervisor dismissed it, his focus entirely on this anomaly. A wicked grin formed on the supervisor's face as he asked if this was the same Kang that Minyuk had failed to recruit in the past. He realized this was a golden opportunity. If our hero passed the guild's elite selection, it would prove that Minyuk had zero eye for talent, ruining his reputation. With a sarcastic sneer, the man thanked the heavens for his rival's incompetence, ready to use Kang's success as a weapon in their corporate war. Silence hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket following the barrage of criticism. He stood frozen, offering no retort, until his fist clenched, crumpling the paper in a grip, trembling with suppressed rage. With a sudden surge of frustration, he crushed the document into a ball of trash, discarding it like his patience. Meanwhile, the protagonist was forging his body into a weapon of war, repulsing gravity with endless pull-ups to build a demon back, refusing to waste even a single second of training. A sharp chime sliced through the air, interrupting his grind. He reached into his pocket, checking the device to see what demanded his attention. Finding a notification with a mysterious link The digital message originated from Guansimi. It appeared to be just another spam link, the kind that had been flooding the network with annoying frequency. Seeing this, Kangi's mind raced with the harsh reality of becoming a ranger. The fear of being deployed to hellish war zones gripped him, and he squeezed the phone tightly, silently praying for every. At the same time, the ranger fleet cut through the wasteland, roaring towards the inevitable battlefield. The atmosphere was heavy with tension. Every soldier, including the man the protagonist saved, could feel the suffocating weight of the destiny waiting for them. They arrived at the slaughter ground, boots hitting the dirt as they disembarked. The lieutenant barked his orders: rescue the civilians and exterminate the monsters. Eternal vigilance was the only law here, because in this living hell, a single moment of carelessness meant watching your comrades die a gruesome death. The extermination squad moved like a well-oiled machine of death. The mutant molds were slaughtered efficiently, dropping one by one before their might. Although the destruction spread like a plague, the monster numbers were finally thinning. A shout pierced the din of battle, ordering the soldiers to advance to the next sector, and they obeyed without hesitation. The soldiers began their tactical repositioning, sweeping the area with hawk-like precision. They scanned every shadow to confirm the sector was secure, hunting for any surviving civilians or lurking beasts. One vigilant soldier let his hatred for the gnolls consume his thoughts. But in his blind rage, he failed to look up, missing the predators waiting in ambush directly above them. The trap was sprung. The movement of the massive creatures dislodged debris, sending rocks raining down like a landslide. The fighter realized too late. He cursed his luck as the monsters descended from the high ground. Weapons thundered as they opened fire, desperate to ensure not a single beast escaped alive. The entire cavern began to crumble, the structure failing under the barrage of bullets and the chaotic rampage of the NS creatures. One of the beasts attempted to flee, but judgment fell in the form of a crushing boulder. Dust and debris exploded into the air, blinding the squad in a suffocating gray fog. Through the haze of low visibility, a blood-curdling scream echoed. A comrade was being mauled by a monster in the dark. But even at death's door, the soldier's instincts screamed survival. He jammed his rifle into the beast's gaping maw, barely blocking the fatal bite. In a split second of heroism, his comrade reached out, gripping his arm and dragging him from the jaws of death just in time. The fighter, Chunsik, spat on the ground, declaring that moments like this were exactly why he loathed these filth-ridden gnolls. After surviving that brush with the Reaper, the lieutenant ordered a sweep of the zone, demanding immediate reports on any remaining hostiles. Chunsik moved out to patrol the perimeter, his senses sharpened to a razor's edge, ready for anything. Suddenly, the point man froze. He spotted an anomaly in the distance, turning his head sharply, his eyes widening in pure shock at what he saw. Urgent and confused, he called out to Commander Park, demanding to know what on earth was happening over there. Park's face darkened. He declared he must break formation. Before deployment, his brother had messaged him about heading to a shelter, but that specific location had been compromised. Chan, panic rising in his voice, begged him to at least follow protocol and report it to the higher-ups first. But Park shook his head. That zone fell under the jurisdiction of the third company, not the second. Chan tried to argue logic, but logic held no power here. Another soldier stepped in, asking for understanding. If it were Chan's own grandmother in danger, he would be making the exact same reckless choice. Chan snapped back that empathy was not the issue. The issue was that Park was trying to march into a suicide zone all by himself. Park hesitated for a heartbeat, the weight of the warning sinking in. Yet, blood is thicker than water. Ignoring the logic, he turned his back on safety and sprinted toward the danger zone. Helpless to stop him, Chon watched his comrade's back retreat into the distance, running toward almost certain death. Park pushed his body to the limit, sprinting as if his life depended on it, desperate to reach his family before the monsters did. But he was not alone. His friend appeared beside him, matching his pace. He yelled that he could not let Park die alone. Park warned him of the danger, pleading with Chan to return to the safe zone. But the commander's words fell on deaf ears. The other soldier grinned, replying that it did not matter where Park went, because he was coming too. He was not doing this for glory. He was accompanying his friend for one simple reason. Because he